Looking for real stories that lift you up and light a fire inside? Welcome to Inspire and Impact, the podcast where purpose meets perseverance. This is where transformation begins and your story continues.
Welcome to the Inspire and Impact podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. The show features real conversation with thought leaders, healers, entrepreneurs, and creatives who share journeys of growth, purpose, and making meaningful impact. Today I have the honor of interviewing Reverend Jason Carson Wilson. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
So Jason, can you share a little bit about your background with our audience, please?
So I am a Black, gay, faith leader, ordained United Church of Christ minister, also, interestingly enough, also an ordained Convergent Catholic Communion priest, which is an independent Catholic community. And I entered into the ministry after 20 years as a journalist. Originally, I felt called to the ministry at age 6, but because I came out as gay, that sort of changed my trajectory, and I found myself in journalism for 20 years. And after that, once I left journalism, I was feeling called to do something more and entered into the ministry with a particular focus of LGBTQ advocacy and social justice. And so that led me to, get a Master of Divinity at Chicago Theological Seminary, which is a United Church of Christ affiliated seminary. And then upon graduation, that led me to get a job with my denomination in their DC office. And so I have been doing national policy advocacy work ranging from immigration, LGBTQ advocacy, racial justice, in the last 10 years.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Can you share a little bit of like you said, like you had some type of like shift that happened in your life. What was that like journey like that led you to become an ordained minister, United Church of Christ?
Well, like I said, going back to when I was 6, I remember walking to the altar in church and sort of feeling like as a 6-year-old, feeling like I could hear God's voice sort of calling me to do something, but I didn't understand what that was. And then because of the church I was being raised in, it was a church that didn't support being gay. And so when I realized I was gay, even at that age, I felt that that church was the only place I could do ministry. So since I was gay and I couldn't do ministry there, I wasn't going to go do ministry at all. And so I found myself, like I said, going into journalism. But what I found was it was kind of like God was dropping breadcrumbs. So one of my second job, I interviewed a UCC pastor, and I learned about the United Church of Christ about 8 years before I would eventually pursue actual ministry. But when I was told that it existed and told that it would, it not only welcome gay people to attend church, it also ordained them, I was like, I didn't really believe that. And so it took me a while to wrap my head around that. And I found myself going to another newspaper at some point. And strangely enough, I was covering a serial killer. He was targeting women of color who were struggling with substance abuse. And they happened to be, again, he was a white man and they were women of color. And so he was killing them and he was dumping their bodies in the area in which I worked. And so the issue I was having was the only stories that were happening were another woman is dead, and I really felt like they deserve to have their stories told instead of just how they died. And so I connected with a lesbian couple who were UCC ministers who were essentially creating this kind of support group for the families. And so I asked them, could I interview the families so I could get stories about these women, so it wouldn't just be about how they died, but what they were like as people. And so got that chance to interview them and wrote those stories, but also got an example of what social justice ministry could look like, and also then got proof that people who were LGBTQ could be in ministry. And so that planted a seed, but I still had several years to wait before I finally found my way to ministry. But eventually, the time came and I felt this call, and again went to seminary, and then found my way to DC, and that coming to DC really opened the door for a lot of the advocacy I did and have done. And I will say, while I was in Chicago, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of ministry there, doing a lot of social justice. I was doing a lot of advocacy around homelessness. And of course, there's sort of the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I was very, very heavily involved in that. I went to Ferguson, Missouri. If you're familiar with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson and near St. Louis, I participated in actions there as well. So it's been a calling that I years in the making.
Well, can I ask you what was the moment when you realized that your faith and activism were deeply interconnected?
I think it's when I began seminary. I mean, I think the time in seminary really helped me realize how interconnected faith and activism are for me. Not only because my seminary is known for that. I'm known for training social justice activists. For example, Reverend Jesse Jackson went to my seminary. But also, I still am a member of a church in Chicago, University Church, which is where I really trained to do social justice advocacy. They were offering space to local youth who were fighting against gun violence and doing a lot of actions and things of that nature. And so I was supporting their work was really what my appetite for the social justice that I would eventually get more involved in Chicago, and then lead me into the work that I'm doing now.
Well, like, how did growing up in Chicago, Illinois, shape your values, your voice, and your sense of justice?
Well, actually, I didn't grow up in Chicago. I grew up in a place called Champaign, Illinois, which is about 2.5 hours south of Chicago. It's a university town. It's the location of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And so I grew up there, and I actually, because my great-grandmother who did the bulk of raising me was a university staff member. She worked for food service. She actually was the supervisor over all the snack bars on campus. I actually found myself growing up on the University of Illinois campus, went to preschool there, and then really that was my dream school. And so I participated in a lot of student enrichment programs, etc., and then got into the university. And and got my journalism degree there at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And really had this idea of when I graduated that I was going to become this, star journalist, and I would probably end up in Chicago working at one of the big Chicago papers, and had this dream of eventually being in D.C., working as a journalist for the Washington Post. But what really ended up happening was I worked sort of up my way up Illinois from Champaign, worked at different small papers going north, and I eventually ended up in a city called Freeport, Illinois. That was one of the last newspapers I worked at, and it's about 2 hours west of Chicago. And when I left that paper, that's when I felt ready to answer the call to ministry. And so I would say that, but going back to my childhood in Champaign, I would say that my call to social justice feels like it's something that I was just born with. One of my first experiences being in the newspaper was writing a letter to the editor and seeing it in print, because I was 8 years old at the time. Our mayors of each town were struggling with having a gay pride parade. Now that would have been 1984, so that tells you how long ago that was. And they were just struggling with having this parade. And of course, at 8 years old, I'm not really understanding a lot. I just understand they want to have a parade. Why is that a problem? And so I wrote the letter, kind of just expressing that sort of childish notion. But as I look back, that was one of my first entries into speaking out against what I kind of felt was an injustice.
Wow, that's very impressive that you did that at such a young age.
Thank you.
I mean, also, I'm always curious to know, I met thousands of people, from all walks of life, from all around the world. And most people I meet or have met, they seem to be just interested in themselves. Very few people are interested in really helping others. So that's part of why I created this podcast, is to showcase people like yourself that are, I call, people like you, really inspiring, that you have this call, and it's a mix of faith and activism to have social justice in the world. And it's inspiring to see people that want to see a positive change. And like you said, you want to have these people that didn't have a voice. You're trying to help them have a voice and share other people's stories that may have, were never told and nobody knew about. Mm-hmm. So that's really amazing. So thank you so much for sharing all of this and being open to these important topics.
Thank you so much again for the innovation.
What is your role as your identity? As you kind of referenced in the beginning of the interview, as a Black gay man played in your journey through faith leadership and advocacy.
So could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. What role has your identity as a Black gay man played in the journey through your faith leadership and advocacy?
I think to sort of play on the point that you made around wanting to make sure people are seen and heard, is that I think parts of our society struggle to see or hear Black people. Certain parts of our society struggle to see and hear gay people. And also, I must say, to share another bit of, piece of identity, being a child of an alcoholic, and enduring abuse also impacts how I see the world, and how those experiences have impacted whether I have felt seen and heard. And so for me, doing this work is about making sure that everyone is seen and heard, and um, it helps me to help others um, be seen and heard. I mean, given that I have been in spaces where I haven't, there have been times that I haven't felt seen and heard, and I feel like rather than maybe wallow in the misery that I felt from not being seen and heard, that the better approach to that is work to make sure that others are seen and heard. And I guess maybe it's also a lesson that I learned from my grandmother. So I'm going to just want to say her name out loud, Lucille May Denniston Wilson Harrington. One of the lessons that she taught was, if you see a problem, fix it. Don't complain about it. Don't cry about it. Do something about it. And so I feel like, in one way, that's one of the reasons that I do this ministry, is that I'm sort of living out one of the lessons that my grandmother taught me.
Wow, I mean, it's definitely really powerful because, again, a lot of people I've met, they feel like kind of stuck and they don't know what to do. There's a lot of people that feel confused, and there's a lot of people that feel very angry that their voices are not seen and heard. And it's always inspiring to see someone like you that has more of a positive outlook, that you can say, like, through faith and activism, there can be social justice and equality, and everybody's voice can be seen and heard and treated as an equal, like they deserve. I mean, so you've held like powerful roles in organizations like in the United Church of Christ, and for what's been the most transformative experience for you in those roles?
I think for the United Church of Christ, it's been where I've had the opportunities to be and be seen, not for myself, but to share stories. So 2017, I was invited to participate in what was called the Ethics of Reciprocity Conference at the United Nations in New York City. I was one of 11 LGBTQI faith leaders from around the world who really spoke to what the impact of discrimination and violence against LGBTQ people are around the world. And I'm proud of the opportunity, not necessarily because I spoke at the United Nations, but because it had an impact on the people that heard me. I still remember some of the people that approached me after sharing my story, and after hearing other stories of how much it impacted them. People who walked in the room with sort of this idea around whether or not being gay is okay, being LGBTQ is okay, that they walked away with a better understanding because they heard real life stories. So that was a transformative experience. Working with for Fellowship Reconciliation, I think the thing that was so transformative for me was doing similar work that one of my heroes, Baird Rustin, did. That's one of the reasons why I was really, really interested in being able to work with them, was because Baird Rustin, who was a Black gay social justice activist, he best known for working with Dr. King and organizing the 1963 March on Washington, got his start in earnest in social justice, working for the Fellowship Reconciliation. So to be a Black gay man myself, following in his footsteps in some way, um, has been a transformative experience, and helped inspire me to found the Baird Western Liberation Initiative, which is an organization that's primarily focuses on supporting Black and LGBTQ people, but obviously when we're confronting injustice, I'm ready to confront injustice anyway.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And what inspired you to find the Bayard Rustin Liberation Initiative?
I
And can you
think
maybe
as
explain
I,
to people what exactly that is? Because maybe some people in the audience may not
yeah,
know what that is.
so it is a nonprofit that I founded in 2018 that um, specifically is really about advocating for LGBTQ people and Black people in particular. And specifically Black LGBTQ people, because at the time it was founded, one of the things I was finding was and observing was that there were uh, LGBTQIA uh, organizations who were doing advocacy, but not every face was being seen. There was not enough, in my view, there was not enough diversity in the advocacy that was being done. And so, again, instead of complaining about it, I decided let's just do something about it. And so I founded the organization and have been steadily working with it since April of 2018.
So, what exactly are like the core values?
Really, it's just I think the core value is really about um, making sure everyone is seen and heard. I mean, I think that is really what the organization at its core is. While yes, primarily I'm advocating for Black and LGBTQ people. Um, Again, this organization is ready to advocate for any marginalized group, and so really at the root, its value is making sure everyone is seen and heard, and everyone um, is valued. And so, one of the ways to do that is to make sure that we're looking at advocating for policies and legislation that uh, doesn't dehumanize anyone.
That's wonderful. And can you explain, like, what does it like sacred resistance mean to you at a personal level? Like, how do you help others embrace sacred resistance?
I think that understanding that life is sacred, resisting oppression is how you protect life. And so that's why I believe that resistance is sacred. Um, Fighting against oppression, fighting against injustice, in whatever form, I think it is, frankly, I think resistance is a form of self care. And even I might say resistance should be a spiritual practice.
So, how can like faith communities move from having a passive belief to active participation in justice work?
Well, in as much as I'm a Christian faith leader, I'm passionate about interfaith engagement. So I really want to put that out there. So I feel like, but what I will say is, if we're speaking to Christian faith communities, uh, that's what Jesus's ministry was about. Jesus's ministry was about confronting the oppression that the empire was heaping upon the marginalized, the least of these. And what I would say to maybe those communities who are feeling that they're not called to that work, or they're not equipped, I would remind them that the church that they sit in today wouldn't exist without the ministry of Jesus, and finding ways to engage in the fight and gather strength and courage in the fight by reminding themselves of what Jesus did. And so that's what I would share.
And why do you think some people still struggle to see social justice as a theological imperative?
I think in part it's because of the way Jesus' ministry has been rebranded, or Jesus has been rebranded or reimagined. A number of my fellow Christians have certain views of Jesus that differ from his actual presence as a liberator, as someone who was challenging the status quo. Yes, he was the Jesus who said, "Welcome the children unto me," and what was that? Yes, he was the Jesus who went to the wedding and turned water into wine. Yes, he was the Jesus who hung out with his disciples and drank and ate and preached. But also, we forget that those prophetic words he shared also confronted the empire, and the reason that they chose to crucify him over the murderer that they demanded be released was because he was challenging empire, challenging the government. And so I say all that to say that this concept of Jesus being sort of this meek and mild being has allowed certain of my Christian brethren and sister and siblings to feel like aggressively fighting oppression is somehow sinful.
Oh, thank you. What has been your experience leading LGBTQ advocacy work within faith spaces, particularly those that have historically been exclusive?
It's been an interesting experience. I mean, as noted, I'm a United Church of Christ minister, and if you, on the surface, we are open and affirming, meaning that we welcome LGBTQ people into the churches, not only in the pews, but in the pulpit. However, we have the Open and Affirming Coalition, which is in charge of the process that churches go through to become officially certified, I suppose you would say, to be open and affirming, is a separate entity from the national setting of our denomination, meaning that it's a separate organization. So the fact that it is not one of the official ministries of the church is one telling sign that there's an issue there. There's also a group that's diametrically opposed to being open and affirming, calling itself faithful and welcoming. And then there are challenges that my LGBTQI colleagues face around being called to particular churches. Now, I'm discussing UCC because I know UCC, but I also know that I have colleagues who could tell you that they're facing the similar issues in other denominations. I mean, we were looking at the United Methodists. I've got friends who are United Methodists and watched that denomination split, essentially, because of the struggles around having LGBTQ people in leadership. So it still is a struggle, and frankly, given the current moment we find ourselves in, I won't. Given the overall theme of our discussion, I will just say that given our current moment in time, I fear that there are ways in which doing LGBTQ advocacy within the confines of faith communities could become more difficult. And so I'm preparing for that moment.
Great. Well, that kind of leads to my next question was how do you navigate either pushback from faith-based communities when advocating for, queer inclusion?
Oftentimes that pushback comes in the form of quoting scripture at me. And I'm well equipped with scholarship. I've got a Master of Divinity. I am in the midst of a Doctor of Ministry degree, and much of that work has been scholarship devoted to debunking what people claim the Bible says about being LGBTQ, and debunking the claims that God finds being LGBTQIA abominable. So that's been the ways in which I've approached that is a lot of public theology, because I don't find it. There was a time I found it valuable to demand people accept me. Early on, when I first came out, that was how I approached life. Was I was going to demand that you accepted me. But I have evolved since then, and I'm in a space now where I will give you the evidence necessary to refute your claims, but I don't find it necessary to justify my existence or apologize for my existence. And embedded in my ministry is encouraging other LGBTQ people, be they seasoned or be they just coming out, that they need not justify their existence or ask for permission to exist, but given the new generation, I'm noticing that I don't need to do that because they're not interested in apologizing to anyone for existing.
Can I ask you? I'm just curious to ask you about this because you mentioned you had like a tough upbringing, like you were raised by your grandmother, and
Mm-hmm.
you dealt with tough issues like alcoholism. Do you feel that like faith has really helped you heal those wounds from the past?
Yes. I think there were times like in the midst of that where I did ask, well, where was God? Because it did take a while before so I lived with my mother for the first 12 years of my life, and essentially was kicked out of my childhood home because I reported child abuse. So it wasn't. I wish it could. So it wasn't a classic form of I was kicked out because I came out. It was more that I had reported child abuse, and um, but up until then, I was helping raise my brother and sister, um, who for their first 2 to 3 years of life, um, as a fifth grader, and before that, I was an only child up until I was 9, and I was sort of on my own when I was with my mother until I would go and visit my grandmother. Um, and through all that, I was praying and praying and praying for sort of this release from this sort of horror story. And there were times when I wondered when that was going to come. And in as much as the moment when I was 12 and was kicked out of my house is an indelible memory, it also was my emancipation. And so there was that answer to prayer. And um, the blessing that I got to live with my grandma from the time I was 12 till I got my second job out of was really um, a blessing for me. And so I would say that um, savoring that blessing of having that time with my grandma um, was what made whatever suffering I felt before then worth it.
And can I ask you? I mean, what advice can you give to maybe people that may have been in a similar situation to what you grew up with? And can you maybe give some like advice or suggestions to people who may have been in that situation and still feel confused or don't know what to do, or you say like, or they don't believe in God anymore because it's like because of these situations that they've been in?
I would say, um, one, if you need to be mad at God, be mad at God. He can handle it, or he, she, they, however you identify God as. I think that's one of the um, mis- mistakes that people try to make when they, particularly people of faith or of Christian faith in particular, when they try to support people in situations like that, is um, dismissing their anger and rage about the situations they're facing. Um, and I don't believe that that is necessary. I believe that uh, God can handle you being mad. So I would just really welcome you to live with that, to sit with that rage, not to the point of hurting yourself or hurting others, Um, but sit with that for a minute, and then if you're in a space where you can, uh, you're in a safe space, and you're in a space where you can move on, that you think about what can I do with that energy, that rage? Can I help others? Can I write about it? Um, but really find a way to put that pain to good use. And I think if I would have told myself when I was in the midst of it or just coming out of it, oh, to put that pain to good use, I would have sort of struggled to process that. But I think uh, what I found is the best way to process the pain and that I went through, the pain and the rage, is to talk about it, to write about it, to help others. And so I feel like that would be a good way to approach a situation similar to mine.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know it's tough, but thank you very much too.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's going to be helping people that do watch this interview. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can tell you're really speaking from the
Thank you.
heart.
Thank you.
Can you maybe share with us the importance of storytelling in your advocacy work? Like, how do you help others share their truth?
I think the importance of storytelling is allowing people to connect with a policy, because you can talk about policies all you want. You can say how important policy ABC is to helping end this issue, or making sure people can have health care, but sharing stories in particular is so important. I will say one of the best friends that I made, and to point to another transformative experience, I participated in a Poor People's Campaign action at the U.S. Capitol, which ended up getting me arrested in the Senate gallery. It was a protest in 2017. They were trying to kill the Affordable Care Act in order to pay for tax cuts passed in the first Trump administration. So I participated in this action, and I got arrested in the gallery. And I ended up making friends with a woman named Leslie Boyd. Now, before we went to the action, we had a kind of a press conference, etc., and she spoke. And she shared this story of her son, Mike, who was dying of cancer, and was fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting to get his medical card, but couldn't get his medical card because he was married. So he had to divorce his wife in hopes of being eligible for his Medicaid card. And even after the divorce, he kept fighting and fighting and fighting. And then eventually he received his medical card 9 days after he died. And so that story remains in my head, obviously. And the significance of storytelling is that when I think of that story, even though I already know, because of my extensive healthcare advocacy, how important healthcare is, how important the Affordable Care Act is, frankly, to me, because I've got a pre-existing condition, and the ACA is how I'm able to access my own healthcare. That story, even if I didn't have my own experiences with healthcare and access allows me to remember the importance of healthcare access. And so that is why storytelling is so important, because it humanizes policy. I mean, how much more humanizing can you get when you have a mother who's lost her son because he got his Medicaid card 9 days after he died instead of when he should have gotten it? That story just helps amplify why certain policies are so important.
And what is your hope for like the next generation of like spiritual leaders and justice advocates?
I see this next generation as being more fearless than I have been. I mean, there are already, particularly LGBTQ faith leaders right now, as I said before, who have never wasted their time begging for acceptance or asking for equality. They're just here demanding it. And so I applaud them and I look up to them. And so I see them as the key to a door that will open us up to true equality sooner rather than later.
And as we kind of wrap up this podcast, what final message we like to share like with the audience that you think is important that can positively impact them?
Mm-hmm. While I have my own, focus for advocacy, the phrase that really rings in my mind are angelic troublemakers, which is a phrase that Baird Rustin coined. And I, again, as I have my own focus, I would just say, if in the moments that we're finding ourselves in, you find yourself uncertain, unsure, anxious, or just want to be able to do something, I think all those feelings can be, you can use all that energy to be an angelic troublemaker in whatever way whatever way suits you, because we all know that not everyone has the mobility or the ability to, march or protest, but you can write a letter, you can be active on social media, you can use your voice on a podcast. And so there are ways in which you can engage the issues that are close to your heart and engage in activity that you feel will help make the world a better place. And so I would just invite you to do that.
And Jason, if somebody had any questions or they're interested in getting in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Is it through your website or social media? Or?
Yeah. So I am You can reach me at jcwilson, brli@gmail.com.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for coming on this podcast and sharing about your experiences and equal justice for all people. I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for sharing your message today.
Thanks again for the invitation.